We have a nice mix of both here in the studio. We've got a lot of robots. Sally and I are real, and we assure you our guests are real too. We'll speak to some of them a little later. But we're going to start today in Spain, where the region of Catalonia is threatening to declare independence on Monday. That's after holding its banned referendum at the weekend. Behind the push for independence is, amongst other things, the feeling amongst many Catalans that the region doesn't get a fair deal, given its huge economic importance to Spain. Well, Catalonia's economy was worth 212 billion euros, that's in 2016. It is the highest GDP of all regions in Spain. In fact, it's actually a bigger economy than Portugal, Greece, the Czech Republic, or many other smaller EU countries. Well, it accounts for around 17% of the entire Spanish economy, and it covers all sorts of sectors, including food, chemicals, cars, and energy production. But its exports are even more important. They were worth over 65 billion euros last year, and it means Catalonia accounts for well over a quarter of all Spanish exports. And of course, its location on the Mediterranean means it's a vital port for Spain. But it's also hugely important for tourism too. 18 million foreigners visited the region last year, almost a quarter of all the trips to the country. But we should say it's not all good news. Catalonia is the most indebted of all the Spanish regions. Debt there has tripled since the financial crisis in 2008 and is now standing at 35% of all economic output.
Thank you, Ben. Well, let's get some analysis now from Ángel Talvera, who is Eurozone economist with Oxford Economics. Good morning. So, Ben, outlining Catalonia's strengths and some of its weaknesses, is it realistic to think it can go it alone?
Well, Catalonia could be an independent state, hypothetically, in the sense that it has the structures in place. And as you say, we've seen smaller countries become independent. I mean, Catalonia is larger than a lot of the Eurozone economies. I don't think that's really the question. The question, I think, is, can you realistically expect to declare independence through a process that is not recognized by anyone internationally, and that means that you will be excluded from the European Union, from the Eurozone? Can you really go forward with that way and think that there will be no impact? Well, I don't think so. I think the economic impact will be enormous, and I think the pro-independence movement is largely ignoring this.
Obviously, there's a hot debate, that's one way of describing it, on this subject. Both sides seem to be poles apart at the moment in terms of what the government in Madrid is saying, what the president of Catalonia is saying. So how do you think this will play out? What will be the resolution in the end?
Well, the short answer for me is that there's no end in sight for this. There's no short, quick fix that can get us back to a situation of normality. I think that the central government's position is very clear. They want to uphold the law, and they're not really in the mood for negotiating. And I think the Catalan movement also has gone really far with this. So I think in the short term, we're going to continue to see a lot of political noise, and eventually we could see a potential suspension of the autonomy if the Catalan parliament actually declares independence. But it's not even clear at this point that they would go ahead with that.
What's the impact in the meantime? On Tuesday they had a general strike in Catalonia. I mean, that had an impact, obviously very short term, but in the long term, what do you think the impact will be on the economy, on businesses operating there?
Well, interestingly, this is like the worst political crisis in Spain in recent history, but the effects on the real economy so far have been very limited, if any, or at least in any way that we can measure. That being said, if we continue to see an escalation and we continue to see strikes, as you mentioned, and the tension gets worse and worse, now we've seen equities falling down quite a lot, of course they will have potential effects on the economy over the long run. But so far it's actually been quite muted.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming in. Really appreciate it. And of course, it's a story we've been across since the beginning of the week, since the weekend, in fact.